The worst part wasn't the knocking. It wasn't even hearing my own voice begging to be let inside while I stood frozen in my living room, hand pressed against my mouth to keep from screaming. The worst part was the voicemail I received 3 minutes later from myself, telling me I'd made the right choice. Because if keeping that thing outside was the right choice, what would the wrong choice have cost me? But I'm getting ahead of myself. The blizzard had been building all evening. February storms in northern Minnesota aren't unusual, but this one felt different from the moment the first flakes began to fall. Heavier, more deliberate. The kind of snow that doesn't drift so much as descend with purpose, each flake sticking to the windows like something trying to find a way in. I'd been living alone in the rental house for 3 months. It was perfect for my needs, isolated enough for privacy, close enough to town that I didn't feel completely cut off. The landlord had mentioned something about the previous tenant leaving suddenly, but I hadn't pressed for details. People leave rentals all the time. The power had been flickering since sunset. I'd set out candles as a precaution, their flames casting jittery shadows across the walls. The wind made the old house creak and settle in ways I was still learning to distinguish. That's how I almost missed it at first. The knocking. It was soft, polite even. 3 measured raps against the front door. I muted the podcast I'd been listening to and waited. The knock came again, slightly more urgent this time. I glanced at my phone, 9:47 p.m. Too late for visitors. The roads were already impassable. I wasn't expecting anyone. "Hello?" I called out, not moving from the couch. "Please." The voice was muffled by the door and the storm, but clear enough. "Please let me in." I stood slowly, my book sliding off my lap. There was something about the voice, something familiar in a way that made my skin prickle. "Who is it?" I moved toward the door, but didn't touch it. "It's me. Please, I'm freezing. The storm, I need help." Me. The voice said it was me. But that was impossible because I was standing right here, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. "Who are you?" My voice came out harder than I intended. "Please, you have to let me in. My car went off the road. I've been walking for miles. I can't feel my fingers. Please." I should have looked through the peephole. That's what any sensible person would do. But I couldn't make myself move closer to the door. Because now that I was listening, really listening, the voice wasn't just familiar. It was mine. The exact pitch. The same slight rasp I got when I was stressed. The way I pronounced my vowels, elongating them just slightly, a remnant of the southern accent I'd spent years trying to shed. "This isn't funny," I said, but my voice shook. "I'm not trying to be funny. Please, I'm gonna die out here. The cold, I can't feel my legs anymore. Why won't you open the door?" The pleading was so genuine, so desperate. If I'd heard a recording of it without context, I would have sworn it was me having a breakdown, begging for help. I pulled my phone from my pocket with trembling hands and turned on the flashlight app. The beam shook as I aimed it at the door. I still couldn't bring myself to look through the peephole. "Tell me something only I would know," I said. Silence. Just the howling wind and the snow battering the windows. Then, "What?" "If you're me, tell me something only I would know. My mother's maiden name, my first pet's name, anything." More silence. I could hear breathing on the other side of the door. Ragged, desperate breathing that fogged in the freezing air. "Let me in and I'll tell you everything. Please. I can't feel anything anymore. The cold is, please." "What happened to your car?" "I hit black ice. Slid off the road about 3 miles back. My phone's dead. Please, you have to help me. I'm begging you." My thumb hovered over the 911 dial screen. This had to be some kind of prank. Maybe someone from work who'd gotten hold of a recording of my voice? But who would do something this elaborate, this cruel, in the middle of a blizzard? The knocking intensified. Both fists now, pounding against the wood. "Let me in! I can't feel anything. Oh God, I'm going to freeze to death out here." The screaming was so real, so terrified, that I actually reached for the deadbolt. My fingers touched the cold metal. Then my phone rang. The sound cut through the screaming, through the storm, through everything. I looked down at the screen. Caller ID, Meredith Faulkner. My name, my own name was calling me. But I was holding my phone. I was looking at it ring. Outside, the screaming stopped mid-shriek, cut off as cleanly as if someone had pressed a mute button. I stared at the phone, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. The ringtone continued its cheerful chirp, absurdly normal against the silence that had fallen outside my door. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My thumb was still hovering over the screen when it went to voicemail. For a long moment, nothing happened. The storm continued to rage. The candles flickered. The house settled with a groan. But there was no sound from outside the door. Then my phone chimed. One new voicemail. I don't know why I listened to it. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe some part of me needed to understand what was happening. I raised the phone to my ear with a shaking hand and pressed play. My voice, calm now, eerily composed, spoke a single sentence. You made the right choice. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor. I stood there for what might have been seconds or hours, staring at the door. Finally, moving like I was underwater, I approached the peephole. My eye was an inch away from the small glass circle when I stopped. What if something was looking back? The thought paralyzed me. I imagined an eye pressed to the other side, waiting, watching for the tiny change in light that would tell it I was there. I forced myself forward, squeezed my eye shut, then opened it against the peephole. The porch was empty. Snow fell in thick curtains through the cone of light from my porch fixture. The rocking chair I'd left out was buried under a white mound, but there was no one there. Except there were footprints, fresh ones, barely filling with snow. They led up to my door, stopped at the threshold, then turned and walked back down the steps. But they didn't lead away from the house. They circled around toward the side, disappearing into the darkness. I backed away from the door on legs that barely held me. I picked up my phone from where it had fallen, opened my recent calls with shaking hands. There it was. Incoming call 9:53 p.m., Meredith Faulkner. But that was impossible. This was my phone, my only phone. I didn't have a landline. How could I have called myself? I opened the voicemail again, played it one more time. You made the right choice. The voice was mine, not similar, not close, mine. I knew every inflection, every micropause, the exact way I shaped consonants. This wasn't an imitation or a recording. This was my voice, in real time, speaking words I hadn't said. I called my best friend Tasha. She answered on the third ring, her voice fuzzy with sleep. Mer, it's almost 10. What's wrong? The concern in her voice almost broke me. I wanted to sob, to tell her everything, but the words tangled in my throat. Can you just talk to me for a second? Tell me about your day? Are you okay? You sound weird. Please, Tasha, just talk. She did. She told me about her shift at the hospital, about a patient's family that had made her laugh, about the new coffee shop near her apartment. Normal things, human things. I held on to her voice like a lifeline while I checked every window in the house, making sure they were locked. Mare, seriously, what's going on? There was someone at my door. During the blizzard, they sounded like they knew me. Did you call the police? I hadn't. No, they're gone now. Do you want me to come over? The roads are bad, but I can try. No, I'm okay. I just needed to hear your voice. We talked for a few more minutes before she made me promise to call if anything else happened. After we hung up, the house felt even quieter than before. I made myself walk back to the door one more time and peer through the peephole. Still empty, but those footprints were still there, half filled with fresh snow now. I turned on the security camera app on my phone, a feature the landlord had installed. I scrolled back through the footage to 9:45 p.m. The timestamp showed the snow falling harder, 9:46, 9:47, the moment when the knocking would have begun. I watched the empty porch, waiting to see who or what had been standing there. But the porch remained empty. The entire time I'd heard the knocking, the screaming, the pleading. Nothing showed on the camera. Just snow and darkness and that buried rocking chair. The footprints appeared at 9:52 p.m., suddenly materializing in the frame as if someone had blinked into existence, walked to my door, then walked away. I checked the side cameras, the back camera. A figure moved past the side of the house at 9:53, heading toward the back. I switched views, following its path. It walked to the back door. Stood there for a long moment, completely still despite the howling wind. Then it raised one hand and pressed it against the glass. The camera quality wasn't great in the storm, but I could make out enough. Same height as me, same build, same coat, the navy blue parka I was wearing right now. It stood there with its palm pressed to the glass for a full minute. Then it turned and walked toward the tree line behind the property, disappearing into the blizzard. I backed up the footage further, looking for when it had arrived. At 9:32 p.m., I saw myself come home from the grocery store, struggling with bags through the early snow. I watched myself unlock the door and go inside. Then I kept scrolling. At 9:35 p.m., I watched myself come home from the grocery store again. Same car, same parking spot, same struggling with bags. I watched myself unlock the door and go inside. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone again. I scrolled back once more, checking the timestamps obsessively. 9:32 p.m., I arrive home. 9:35 p.m., I arrive home again. Same coat, same movements. But it wasn't a glitch in the recording. The snow had gotten heavier between the two arrivals. The accumulation on the porch steps was deeper in the second version. One of those people had been me. I remembered coming home, remembered the snow just starting to really fall, remembered dropping the bags on the kitchen counter. But which one had I been? I forced myself to keep scrolling. At 9:38 p.m., the figure I'd seen at 9:35 emerged from the house. But now she wasn't carrying groceries. She walked to the edge of the porch, stood there for a moment with her face tilted up to the falling snow. Then she descended the steps and walked around the side of the house, heading toward the woods. I switched to the side camera. There she was, walking with purpose through the deepening snow toward the tree line. She didn't look back, didn't hesitate. Just walked into the white darkness as if she knew exactly where she was going. That had been 9 minutes before the knocking started. I checked the back camera. Nothing showed her returning until 9:53, after the phone call, after the voicemail. She'd been out there in the blizzard the entire time. The realization crept over me like ice water. That thing hadn't been trying to get in. It had come from inside. It had walked out into the storm, and then, minutes later, had tried to convince me to let it back in by pretending to be me in distress. But why had it left in the first place? And worse, far worse, was the question I couldn't stop asking myself. Which one was I? The one who'd come home at 9:32, who'd been inside this whole time, who'd refused to open the door, or the one who'd arrived at 9:35 and walked into the blizzard? I checked my recent memories frantically. I remembered coming home. I remembered the snow starting. I remembered putting away groceries, starting a podcast, settling on the couch. But were those my memories, or was I remembering them because I was supposed to remember them? My phone buzzed with a text message. I nearly screamed. It was from Tasha. "You sure you're okay? I'm worried." I started to type a response, then stopped. I looked at my hands, my phone, the familiar weight of it, the crack in the screen protector I'd been meaning to replace. This was my phone. These were my hands. I was Meredith Faulkner, and I was standing in my living room, and I hadn't gone anywhere. I finished texting Tasha back, "I'm okay. Sorry I scared you. Going to bed soon." I went through the house again, checking every door, every window, every closet. All locked, all empty. Just me and the storm and the shadows. But as I passed by the kitchen, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The grocery bags were still on the counter. That made sense. I remembered setting them there when I'd come in. But they were wet. Not just damp from the snow I'd walked through. They were soaking wet, water pooling on the counter beneath them, dripping onto the floor. Ice crystals clung to the plastic. I'd only been in the snow for maybe 30 seconds, running from car to door. Not long enough to soak the bags like this. Not unless I'd stood outside in the blizzard for several minutes. Or unless these were different bags from the ones I remembered. I opened the refrigerator with trembling hands. The groceries were put away. Milk, eggs, cheese, everything in its proper place. But I didn't remember putting them away. I remembered setting the bags on the counter and meaning to do it later, after I'd settled in. Had I put them away and forgotten, or had someone else done it for me? I grabbed a kitchen knife and returned to the living room, sinking onto the couch with the blade across my lap. The storm raged on. The candles burned low. Every creak of the house made me flinch. My phone stayed silent for the rest of the night. No more calls from myself, no more knocking. But I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Because I kept thinking about what the voicemail had said. You made the right choice. The right choice had been keeping the door locked, keeping that thing outside, in the storm, in the cold. But if that was right, it meant the wrong choice would have been letting it in, and I couldn't stop wondering what would have happened if I had. Would it have looked like me, talked like me? Would I have even known which one of us was real? Or worse, was there never a choice at all? Maybe I hadn't been the one inside. Maybe I was the one who'd walked into the blizzard at 9:38, and the thing that had come home at 9:32 was sitting here now, holding this knife, thinking these thoughts, believing itself to be me. Maybe the voicemail hadn't been a confirmation. Maybe it had been a warning. As dawn finally broke and the storm began to clear, I checked the camera footage one last time. At 5:47 a.m., while I sat on this couch, something emerged from the tree line behind the house. A figure, my height, my build, my walk, covered in snow, moving slowly as if every step was agony. It approached the back door, stood there for a long moment as if listening. Then it turned and walked back into the woods, leaving a trail of footprints that the falling snow quickly began to erase. I haven't left the house since that night. It's been 3 days. The groceries in the fridge are running low. My boss has called twice. Tasha has texted 17 times. But I can't bring myself to open the door. Because every time I think about stepping outside, I wonder, am I the one who should stay in, or am I the one who belongs out there? The snow has stopped now, but the cold remains. Deep, bone-penetrating cold that seems to seep through the walls. And each night at 9:47 p.m., the knocking starts again. Soft, polite, 3 measured raps. And each night, my phone rings exactly 3 minutes later. Caller ID Meredith Faulkner. I don't answer anymore. But the voicemail is always the same. You made the right choice. I'm starting to think it's lying.